Hello, my name is William Hanson. I'm an etiquette coach, and I'm delighted to be talking to you today about modern etiquette. Now, so many people have different perceptions as to what the word etiquette actually means. You might hear words like manners or protocol. Are they the same? Are they different? Are they similar? Well, let me tell you, because over the next 15-20 minutes or so, we are going to learn all about modern etiquette and how we can apply that to your life. Now, manners, etiquette, and protocol are different, and it's those top two that we're really going to focus on in today's session. Manners are the guiding principles of nice, decent human interaction. Every country in the world believes that we need to be nice to one another. It would be a very boring and nasty world if we didn't. So manners are universal and apply to every country and every culture. How we are well-mannered, how we achieve our well-manneredness, to invent a word, is by using a set of rules. Now, those rules we call the etiquette. Sometimes they're called protocol, but generally they are called etiquette. And 90% of the time, what I will tell you today, what other books, what other etiquette tutors may tell you, 90% of the time it is correct. But sometimes, in order to be more well-mannered, you actually have to break the specific rule about etiquette in order to be more well-mannered. And before we go any further, let me just tell you the apocryphal story. Whether or not this is true or not, who knows? But supposedly in the 90s, during a lavish banquet in London, where the Prince of Wales was host, he was hosting another world leader from a country in the third world. And at this banquet in London, finger food was served, food that we eat with our hands. And supposedly, one of the guests from the third world picked up the finger bowl, the small little water bowl that you use to sort of clean your hands at the table. He picked it up and thought it was his glass of water and started to drink from it. Now, obviously, the etiquette of a finger bowl is not to drink from it. It's just dip the hands in to clean them. However, some of the British guests noticed this and started to laugh, and that's not good. And the Prince of Wales supposedly noticed the people laughing, and so picked up his own finger bowl and drank from it in order to make his guest feel more comfortable. So he deliberately broke the etiquette in order to be more well-mannered. So just a slight caveat to everything I say in today's session, 90% of the time what I tell you to do will be correct, but sometimes we have to trust our gut feeling, our judge the moment in order to be more polite. And that will always trump following the exact rules of etiquette. So those are the differences. Let's start by talking about first impressions. And I'm sure you've often heard people quote that it takes 7 seconds for someone to form an opinion of you. And they are right. This was research, scientific research that was done many years ago and was looked into again as recently as 2017 by Harvard, the American university. And interestingly, if we look at that stat, it says it takes up to 7 seconds for someone to form an opinion of you. Up to. I actually think people form first impressions about people in a much shorter time frame than 7 seconds. I'd say it's probably about 2, whether it's appearing on Zoom, opening the front door and seeing somebody stood there, whether it's even on a dating app. We judge people within such a short space of time. It's probably not a great thing that we judge people so quickly. We probably want to get to know someone for days and weeks and months before we judge them. That would be lovely, but in reality, it's not what happens. It's in many ways, it's a survival instinct that we inherit from animals. Let's think about a cat and a mouse. When a mouse sees a cat, it makes a very quick judgment in order to survive, and it runs away. And so that's something that humans do as well. We look at how someone is standing, we look at what they're wearing, we look at how they greet us, and we're focusing on that aspect of things for today and for your particular careers. The other interesting statistic that Harvard found in 2017 is that it takes up to 7 more interactions for humans to change their first impression of another. So really, what we can see from that is it's very important to make a good first impression, because actually it's much harder to then make 7 brilliant second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth impressions on somebody to erase that bad first impression. In your particular careers, hopefully, if everything goes to plan, you won't be going back that many times. And so you don't actually have that opportunity to erase that bad first impression, which is why we have to get it right, whether that's in our professional or social lives. So when you meet someone for the first time, conventionally we would shake hands. That's the fairly international universal greeting for someone we do not know. We don't know them very well, so we don't go in and give them a kiss or a hug. That's social greetings that we use for people that we know well. But in the professional sphere, the handshake is the greeting. We use our right hand. We look at somebody in the eye, and I'll come back to that one in a minute because that's critical. The palm of the hand faces inwards, not down. We're not going to shake like so, giving a dominant handshake. The palm faces inwards. Similarly, we don't give a submissive handshake with the palm facing upwards. The palm points inwards. We shake twice. The web of the hand must lock the web of their hand. So we're not going to grab their fingers and give quite a weak sort of wet fish handshake. The webs must lock. And we smile as well. The smile is so important for any form of greeting, whether it's a handshake or maybe a contactless greeting. And we'll talk about those in a minute. Eye contact. When we look at somebody in the eye, we produce a chemical in our brain that bonds us between them and the other person. That chemical is called oxytocin. And when we produce oxytocin, it what makes us like somebody and trust them. And ultimately, you are in a position where the trust has got to be there. You are entering someone's home, their private living space, for example. And so they have to trust you because they are allowing you over the threshold into their safe space. And if they don't trust you, it's just not going to work for anybody. So trust is key. And if we don't make eye contact within those first 7 seconds, there is no oxytocin produced and there is no trust. Absolutely vital that we make eye contact. Obviously, if we stare at somebody when we greet them, we don't produce oxytocin either. We intimidate them. So there is a fine line, and we'll talk about how much eye contact is correct later on in our session today. The web to web, the way to ensure that you are locking between the thumb and the forefinger, locking that fleshy part of your hand, is not to shake their hands with your fingers pointing at them, but point the fingers down to the floor when you go in to shake hands. And that will ensure that the fleshy part is presented, and hopefully as long as they're doing something similar, it will mean that we take the whole hand and not just shake the top of the hand. Now, they may, of course, have a terrible handshake. They're not listening to this talk. We can't do anything about that, but we can ensure that you have a good handshake. And part of that handshake, which again represents trust, is part of that first 7 seconds. Everyone says that you can judge someone based on their handshake. If it's a pathetic wet handshake, maybe they're too submissive, they're a pushover. If it's a really aggressive handshake, perhaps they're a bit too aggressive, they're compensating for whatever. Now, obviously, it would be wrong to talk about greetings without acknowledging what has gone on in 2020 and much of 2021 with the pandemic. And this changed how we greet people. But actually, contactless greetings we have had pre-coronavirus. You might be going into somebody's house where they don't wish to shake your hand, whether that's for their own personal reasons or a religious reason, or maybe they are still worried about health implications. And so they may wish to give you a contactless greeting. Now, it does make things slightly harder for everybody in life at the moment, because we've sort of got to be, when we meet someone new in whatever sphere, we have to be ready to react to the signals that we see. So if they extend their hand, obviously you're going to be giving them a handshake. I would normally suggest that you extend your hand to them, but I would just now, at the moment, for the next year or two, just give it a slight beat before you do that in order to read the signals. You might give them a namaste, which, as we can see, was favoured by all sorts of people, from Anton Deck to the Prince of Wales. And it's a nice, friendly gesture that we borrowed from the Far East, which means I bow to the divine within you, which is really lovely. Or you might do the hand on heart. which we see here the Prime Minister of Canada doing, Justin Trudeau, which is actually a greeting that we see a lot in the Muslim community when a man and a woman are greeting, because traditionally in Islam, women and men do not touch unless they are married. So you might want to do a hand on heart greeting. Whichever, it's up to you if you're giving a contactless greeting or they give you a contactless greeting. But just remember to be proactive and reactive to what you observe. Now, in terms of what you say when you meet somebody, traditionally we would give it when we haven't met them before, they're not our friend, we don't know who they are, we haven't spoken to them, we give them a slightly more formal greeting to begin with. Because at that point, you don't know what sort of person they are. If you're arriving at their house and you go, "Hey, I'm Rob," and give them a high five, for example, and they're not a "Hey, I'm Rob" high five sort of person, already they've judged you as, "Uh-oh, this person's not like me," or "I'm not sure I'm going to get along with this person." And it's very hard then, after you've given a relaxed greeting, to sort of scale up into a more formal greeting when you realize, oh, hang on, they need a bit more formality. But actually, if you give a fairly sort of slightly more formal greeting and then you realize they're more relaxed, very easy to slide down. So always play it safe to begin with. What we see on the screen is the best sort of neutral-ish, slightly formal greeting. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time of day, and then both of your names. And we want to give both of your names because ultimately it's going to give them a greater chance to remember your name. But you may not feel comfortable, or it may not be policy to give your last name. If you just want to give your first name, that's absolutely fine. Just say your name clearly so they understand it and can remember it as well. However, the most important thing you do if they are the first person to greet you, and actually they introduce themselves to you, so you are person two, if we look at the screen, is that you react to how they greet you. You mirror their behavior. So if they give you a super formal greeting, "Good morning, John Smith, how do you do?" Give them a super formal greeting as well. "Good morning, Alice Jones, how do you do?" Whereas if they give you a more relaxed, "Hello, I'm John," absolutely fine for you to give them a "Hello, I'm Alice" type of greeting. So listen and react to how they greet you. Often people give you the clues as to how they wish to be treated. So you can take those sort of verbal and sometimes visual clues as to what sort of greeting you give them. Now, hopefully you're never going to do this. Both gentlemen are getting something wrong from a handshake greeting point of view here. They're not looking at each other. That's error number one. Obviously, we know that both gentlemen didn't really like each other very much, but really they should still have been making eye contact. But the other, perhaps bigger issue is that they're both sitting down, and you never shake hands sitting down. If you can, you stand up. And obviously on first greeting, you're probably standing at their front door. You're not going to be sitting down. So hopefully this isn't an issue, but always stand up or give a token rise from your seat in order to shake hands. Similarly here, both the gentlemen we see are making a slight mistake from an etiquette or protocol point of view, and certain cultures worry about this more than others, but they are shaking hands across a barrier. And we never shake hands across a barrier, a table, a desk, a washing machine, whatever it happens to be. In an ideal world, we come round. However, difference between manners and etiquette, although it's not good etiquette to shake hands across a barrier, if someone does extend their hand, particularly if they're a client, across the barrier, you can't say to them and tell them to come round and shake their hand. You just sort of go with it. Now let's talk about introducing others, whether you bring another one of your colleagues on site and you have to introduce them. It's only right that people know, well, who is this person that's just turned up at my house that I didn't see the day before or earlier on? Again, from a trust and safety point of view, if someone random turned up to my house, I'd want to know who they are, and I'm sure you would be the same. Generally, and I'll give you the more formal, and then you can adapt it to your own environment. But formally, we say the name X may introduce Y, and we put the most important person's name first. So X may introduce Y. X is more important than Y in this instance. But let's talk about how we decide who is more important than who. It's going to be quite easy for you, because really, if they're a client, if it's their home, for example, that you're in, or their office that you are in, they're the client, they are the most important person. And it's as straightforward as that. So anyone else that you would have to introduce them to, or introduce to them, is the junior in the introduction. So if it's your colleague that turns up, and another engineer, someone from head office, whoever it happens to be, they're on your side, and so the client goes first. So Miss Client, may I introduce Mr. Colleague. Most important person, may I introduce less important person. You don't have to mirror. So many people might say, Abby, this is Bethany, Bethany, this is Abby. You don't have to do that. That's also technically wrong, but I'll save that for another time. Just say, most important person, client, may I introduce colleague. Clients are more important than anyone, remember that. Also, give some context as well. And this is something you can take into your social lives as well. Mr. Client or Ms. Client, may I introduce Mr. Colleague. Mr. Colleague has joined me to help with such and such. So don't just leave it at X, may I introduce Y. Give a bit of context as to who they are and why they are there. So the client ultimately feels safe and trusts you. Also, be mindful of how you refer to them. If they are your apprentice, if they're your assistant, whatever it happens to be, don't just say, this is my assistant. Don't say, this is my assistant, Oliver. Say, or don't even say my colleague, Oliver. Now, colleague is nicer than assistant. It sort of removes that hierarchy from it. We're all on the same side. They don't need to know who reports to who. But actually put the name of your colleague first, or your apprentice. They're a person first, and then it's the role. And it sounds much nicer to focus on people. People do business with people. So put them first, and then their title or who they are. Now, I said I would mention eye contact in a bit more detail. Always see before you speak. We mean look at somebody before you start speaking. How many times have we been in a supermarket or a department store and they start talking to you whilst they're still looking at the till, or they're wrapping something up, or they're scanning your items, and they haven't actually looked at you? Remember what I just said, people do business with people. People will want to come to you for the people skills as well as the fantastic products as well. And looking at someone and connecting with them on a human level is an easy way that we are all capable of doing to ensure that somebody is building that oxytocin, producing the bonding chemical between two people, which is ultimately why we like some people more than others. Now, the 50-70 rule is something to keep in mind when you are talking and listening. When you are talking to somebody, you can give them 50% eye contact. When you're listening to somebody, you give them 70% eye contact. What can we take from this? When you're listening, you need to give somebody more eye contact to coax them into talking, to make sure they know that you are understanding what they are saying. So if a client is telling you of their problem with the boiler, the washing machine, whatever it happens to be, by looking at them, by smiling and by nodding can help build that connection and make sure that they feel that you are understanding what the problem is and you can fix it. Now, when you greet them for the first time, we talked about how much is too much eye contact. Clock their eye color. That's so important. That's how long it really should be. So when you greet someone, when you're giving them a contactless greeting, shaking hands, look at them long enough for you to go, oh, they have dark blue eyes, they have dark brown eyes. It's about a half second longer than most people hold eye contact, but that half second is vital in producing a decent level of oxytocin. Now, we're coming to the end of our session, but a few other things I want to talk about is remembering names. Nobody's really that great at it. Meeting and repeating is generally a really good idea. It might be easy for you because it might be on the booking form, so hopefully that's quite simple for you. But actually using someone's name back in conversation is always a good idea. You could spell it out if you maybe don't catch it, or you meet someone else whose name isn't on the booking form and it's a more unusual name that you haven't heard of before. Ask them to spell it. You're asking questions about them as well, which always goes well. You can use mental games like associate and anchor. If they're called Ben, and you could maybe picture Big Ben coming out of their head. Works for some people, doesn't work for me because I don't have a visual brain. But sometimes honesty is the best policy. But don't say to them, I've forgotten your name. No one's going to react nicely to that. Say, please remind me of your name. It's softer and hopefully people don't object as much. Final thing we're going to talk about today is small talk. Technically, these are the 5 taboo topics that we never want anyone in any situation to talk about with strangers, and certainly not in a professional setting like the ones you will be going. Don't talk about money. Don't ask how much something costs. Don't talk about religion, politics, health, or anything personal. Those are the terrible topics. Please avoid them. Good topics are weather, news and current affairs, public transport or travel, for example. Have you got here? How did you come here? Probably not appropriate in someone's house because they probably haven't travelled there. They live there. They've walked downstairs. Popular culture, or the room that you are in. That's what those wine glasses represent. You can talk about, oh, what a beautiful view. Oh gosh, what a lovely neighbourhood. You can use the environment you're in. They are always safe topics of conversation. But good conversation, especially in a customer service point of view, is always positive, it's informed, you're focusing on them and forgetting about you, but towing that fine line and not asking anything personal. And if you're going to give someone a compliment, focus it on them. Say, your wallpaper looks great. They don't want to know that you like the wallpaper, tell them it looks good. So change how you phrase certain things in order to react. In order to get a better reaction from them. Remember, if you take nothing else from today's session, etiquette and manners are slightly different, and good manners will always top etiquette. Being polite, making a good first impression, and ultimately representing you and the business you work for in the best possible way is the name of the game. Thank you very much for listening.